This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Look at this road. It looks like any other dangerous suburban arterial. I'm filming this on the side of a road with no sidewalk. But this street has a boundary running through it, separating the urban side over here from the rural side here. Nobody could build housing on this side, it's required to stay agricultural. And the housing on the other side of the boundary is higher density than you'd expect to find right up against a farm on the edge of a metro area. This is a visual example of the promise of an urban growth boundary, a line meant to keep urban growth within the line and protect farm and forest land outside of it. These boundaries are often cited as an effective way of limiting suburban sprawl and protecting natural resources. But do they actually do anything, or do they do too much and make housing more expensive for everyone in the region? These are important questions to answer, as many US cities and cities abroad have urban growth boundaries. Let's try to answer those questions after the bike bell. The concept of an urban growth boundary is simple, but there's more to it than just drawing a line. For example, where do you draw it? What cities don't do is draw it right up against the existing extent of urbanization, essentially shrink-wrapping the region and not allowing any new growth on the urban fringe. Here's how it works in Portland, where I took that video from before. The UGB must have enough land inside for 20 years of growth. According to Oregon state law, they have to evaluate the boundary every 6 years to ensure that's still true. For example, in 2019, Metro, the regional agency that manages planning, determined that the region needed an additional 2,000 acres added to the boundary. Their projections estimated that they needed 9,200 more housing units than they had capacity for and made the boundary adjustments. They can also decide to simply upzone parcels to more efficiently use the land and not make any boundary adjustments. Portland made no adjustments to their boundary in the round before last. Portland also identifies areas outside the boundary where they may expand into in the next 50 years. They're called urban reserves, areas determined to be appropriate for future urban development. The point of a UGB isn't to strangle growth, but to ensure that it happens in a compact, efficient manner. Urbanites get their dense, transit-supportive metropolitan areas, and rural folks get peace of mind. They know their land can stay rural and the city won't encroach. But even the best ideas have unintended consequences. There are two common critiques of urban growth boundaries. One, that they constrain the supply of housing, making housing more expensive, and two, that they don't do anything to actually contain sprawl. Let's start with the first critique. According to the logic, by constraining the land available for development, UGBs decrease the supply of housing, causing housing prices to increase. In a West Coast city like Portland, where housing unaffordability is almost a given already, a UGB-related price increase would just be piling on and could hurt a lot of people. So is it true? Like most things in planning, the answer is complicated. Studies have shown that UGBs can increase the cost of land within the boundary, but not necessarily the final cost of housing. How does that work? Well, if housing is built to higher densities, in part to maximize the value of the limited land, the cost per unit could still be lower. Remember those buildings at the beginning of the video? 3 stories right on the edge of farmland is pretty dense. This can offset the higher initial land costs. This might mean that there are fewer large lot single-family subdivisions, but that's a good thing if you don't want wasteful lawns and longer commutes. One recent study of the Seattle area, which also has a UGB, even shows that on average, housing prices are lower just inside the UGB than just outside of it. Only extremely expensive and extremely inexpensive homes saw price increases inside the UGB. The author of the study speculated that because land prices were higher inside, developers were more likely to maximize the number of units on each lot, which resulted in lower prices, just like we said. But that's just one study, and like I said, it's complicated. 2 studies found that housing prices increased in Portland due to the UGB, while another found no effect. A study of Knoxville, Tennessee's urban growth boundary found an increase in prices, and yet another Seattle study found a price decrease. The reality is that there are many factors influencing housing prices, and the constraint of land due to the urban growth boundary is just one aspect of that. One study found that there could be an increase in prices right inside the UGB because that boundary locks in nice rural views for the houses nearby. Those homeowners know that there won't be any new development blocking their views for years. We know that UGBs don't necessarily increase housing prices within the region, but what about the second critique, that they don't actually stop sprawl at all? Well, to be fair, nothing about boundaries suggests that the development within it has to be compact, walkable with access to transit. A study of land development within the urban growth boundary found that exurban development, development at a density even lower than suburban development, was occurring. This was happening in the unincorporated rural areas in the UGB where there wasn't high-density zoning to encourage more intense use. Okay, so sprawl can still happen within the boundary, but does the boundary stop sprawl outside of it? Maybe not. What's stopping development from just skipping over to the next town down the road outside the urban growth boundary and setting up development there? The boundary then would be just displacing sprawl, not stopping it. And if those people are still commuting into the UGB, it can actually create a negative environmental impact due to the longer commutes. This is called a spillover effect. Portland's metro area is up against the Oregon-Washington border, and the state of Washington didn't have any statewide growth management planning until 1990, years after Oregon adopted theirs. That meant that suburban development couldn't happen on the fringe of the Portland metro area in Oregon, but it was game on in Washington. Vancouver, Washington was a release valve for suburban growth for decades. Basically, Portland exported its sprawl to Washington. There's also evidence that some suburban development happened in more far-flung rural communities. These critiques about housing prices and spillover effects aren't enough to totally discredit the idea of UGBs, but just an example of how all land use policies in a region need to work in concert. Now, what are some of these complementary policies that can make a UGB work better? Land use policies within the boundary have to allow and encourage higher density development so housing prices remain reasonable. A UGB is pointless if all the developable land within the boundary is essentially zoned to allow sprawl. The city of Portland, one of the 24 cities within the UGB, recently passed the Residential Infill Project, one of the most aggressive measures to increase density in a central city anywhere in the US. It allows fourplexes on any residential lot in the city. Effectively, single-family zoning is history. It even allows sixplexes if half the units meet affordability standards. Optimistic projections have the Residential Infill Project increasing housing production in the city by 20%. That's a lot of homes, which means that when Metro has to decide to expand the urban growth boundary, the answer is more likely to be no. With the right mix of policies, urban growth boundaries can effectively rein in car-oriented suburban development. But only 3 US states, Oregon, Washington, and Tennessee, require large urban areas to adopt a UGB. Some cities, like San Jose, California, and Boulder, Colorado, have adopted them without state mandate. State mandates are helpful though because they typically require regional cooperation. Like I mentioned before, without all cities within a metro area on board, you're going to get spillover effects. All of that sprawl is going to be redirected to the community that doesn't want to take part in it. The state of Oregon passed its UGB law, SB 100, back in 1973. Republican Governor Tom McCall seized upon an unlikely alignment of environmentalists, farmers, loggers, and urbanites, and called for and signed a law for comprehensive statewide planning. Here's what he had to say about suburbia.
But there is a shameless threat in our environment and in the whole quality of our life, and that is the unfettered despoiling of our land. Sagebrush subdivisions, coastal condominium, and the ravenous rampage of suburbia here in the Willamette Valley all threaten to mark Oregon's status as the environmental model of this nation.
Hey, that's pretty progressive for the 1970s. State law requires entire regions to submit their urban growth boundaries for state approval. The state then checks them up against Oregon's statewide planning goals, and if they meet those goals, they're approved. Few states exert as much top-down land use control as Oregon, but you need that kind of state mandate to force local governments within regions to work together. Urban growth boundaries aren't perfect, but paired with the right supporting land use policies, they can be effective at curbing low-density development. And honestly, we need to use every tool we can to stop that kind of development because it bankrupts our local communities, harms the environment, and increases traffic congestion. So it just makes sense. This is my last video for my visit to Portland. Did you know that I used to live in Portland? Probably not, since I share next to nothing about myself personally on YouTube. But if you made it this far, maybe you're interested in who I am, how I make these videos, and how I got my start on YouTube in the first place. A video about that on YouTube wouldn't do well with the algorithm and could actually harm my channel. So I posted it over on Nebula. It's a streaming service I co-own with other great creators, and we're posting all kinds of ad-free bonus content over there. We're talking about creators like Not Just Bikes, Real Life Lore, Wendover Productions, and Real Engineering. Nebula is great, and it's made even better thanks to our partnership with CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is the source for high-quality, engaging documentaries. They have so much city content on there that you'll never get bored, including documentaries on Rio de Janeiro, New York City, Cape Town, and the planned city of Mathur. They're the perfect companions to the content on this channel. We have a deal where if you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link on the screen, you'll get Nebula for free. That's not a free trial, but free as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. And they're running a special deal where you can get the entire year for 26% off. That's less than $15 a year for CuriosityStream and Nebula. Signing up is a great way of supporting this channel as well as the dozens of other creators working to make Nebula a success. Overall, it's just a great deal too, so consider signing up.